Göbekli Tepe itself was the end of a process, not the beginning of a process. It was something that marked, it was a marker. It was something that brought together the best of everything that they'd accumulated and created it in one place and left it there.
Göbekli Tepe has stood silent for 12,000 years.
Göbekli Tepe comes from what is referred to as Layer 3. It is the oldest section of Göbekli Tepe, dating back nearly 12,000 years.
But the moment scientists ran a 3D scanner across its ancient pillars, their hands trembled. This is not just an old temple. This is something that tears apart every page of human history we thought we understood. Klaus Schmidt stepped onto this soil in 1994 expecting a routine dig. What he uncovered kept him awake for the rest of his life. 50-ton stones, no metal tools, no wheels, no civilization, yet the geometry so flawless. Even today's engineers go speechless. And now, the new 3D scan has finally surfaced what was buried for decades. Stay with us once you hear this truth. You'll never look at history the same way again. The man who refused to walk away, most archaeologists would have walked past this hill without a second thought. In 1963, a joint survey team from Istanbul University and the University of Chicago did exactly that. They were moving through the dry, rocky landscape of southeastern Turkey.
Landscapes which you should visit when you travel to Turkey. Turkey is an amazing country with incredible history. You can find the ruins and archaeological preserved sites of every major civilization before us.
Cataloging sites, noting surface finds, doing what survey teams do. On a hilltop near the small town of Şanlıurfa, they spotted fragments of carved limestone scattered across the ground. They noted the location. They described the fragments as likely Byzantine or medieval in origin. They moved on. Nobody came back. For over 30 years, that hilltop sat completely undisturbed. The fragments were buried under dust and assumptions, and the rest of the world went on building its version of ancient history without any idea what was sleeping beneath that unremarkable mound of dirt in southern Turkey. Then came Klaus Schmidt. Schmidt was a German archaeologist who had spent the better part of his career studying one of the most important questions in all of human prehistory: the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural communities. This shift, known as the Neolithic Revolution, is considered one of the defining moments of our species. It gave rise to farming, permanent settlements, surplus food, specialized labor, population growth, and eventually everything we recognize as civilization. Schmidt believed the answers to how and why this transition happened were buried somewhere in the region around Şanlıurfa. This part of Turkey, sitting at the edge of the Fertile Crescent, was one of the earliest known zones of agricultural development. The landscape itself was a kind of archive layers of human activity pressed into the earth over thousands of years. In 1994, Schmidt came across the site records from the 1963 survey. Something in the brief description caught his attention. He went to look. Standing on that hilltop, examining the fragments that the 1963 team had dismissed as medieval, Schmidt recognized something the earlier surveyors had not. The workmanship was wrong for Byzantine stone. The style was wrong. The type of carving was wrong. These fragments were not medieval. They were prehistoric, and they were connected to something much larger buried just beneath the surface. Schmidt returned the following year with a team and began excavating in 1995. What emerged from the earth over the following 2 decades would quietly dismantle the version of ancient history that had been taught in universities, written into textbooks, and accepted as settled fact for over a century. Pillar after pillar came out of the ground, carved, massive, arranged in deliberate circular patterns, each one older than anything comparable ever found anywhere in the world. Schmidt kept digging. He kept coming back. Year after year, he returned to this hilltop in southeastern Turkey, driven by a question he could not stop asking: who built this, and what did they know? He died in 2014, still excavating, still searching. He never found the complete answer. The site he devoted his life to is estimated to be only about 5% uncovered, stones that should not exist. To understand why Göbekli Tepe breaks everything, you first have to see what is actually there. Beneath that hilltop in southeastern Turkey, researchers found at least 20 circular enclosures. Each one is defined by massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in rings. At the center of each enclosure stand the 2 largest pillars, facing each other, taller, heavier, more elaborately carved than the ones surrounding them. The site covers an area so large that current estimates suggest less than 5% of it has been excavated. What we have seen is likely a fraction of what exists. The T-shape of the pillars is not accidental or purely structural. Researchers widely believe these are stylized human figures. The tall vertical section represents a body. The wide horizontal cap is a head. On several pillars, arms have been carved in low relief along the sides, thin human arms, reaching down the length of the stone, with hands carved at the front, fingers meeting just below where a navel would be. These are not abstract shapes, they are beings. Whether they represent gods, ancestors, or something else entirely, nobody has yet determined. The carvings on these pillars are what take your breath away. Lions with detailed muscle structure.
With the limestone reliefs featuring everything from lions, boars, foxes, donkeys, gazelles, reptiles, snakes, arthropods, and countless other living creatures.
Carved with the kind of accuracy that comes from close, repeated observation of live animals. Foxes depicted with careful attention to fur texture and body proportion. Scorpions rendered with such anatomical precision that the species can be identified from the carving alone. Vultures with fully spread wings, individual feathers visible in the stone. Snakes, wild boars, aurochs, spiders, cranes, ducks, and creatures that cannot be confidently matched to any known animal shapes that may represent mythological beings, or species that have since gone extinct, or simply things we do not yet understand. These are not scratched outlines. They are high-relief carvings. The figures stand out from the surrounding stone surface, which means significant material had to be carefully removed around each figure to create a three-dimensional effect. This technique requires extraordinary skill and extraordinary patience. One wrong strike of the chisel, one moment of miscalculation, after months or years of careful work, and an entire pillar is ruined. The carvers did not make those mistakes. The work is precise, it is confident. It is the work of people who had mastered their craft over years of training and practice. Now consider the scale of what they were moving. The largest pillars at Göbekli Tepe weigh approximately 50 tons. For a reference point, 50 tons is roughly equivalent to 3 fully loaded school buses stacked on top of each other. These stones were quarried from bedrock at a site several hundred meters away from where they were erected. They were shaped at the quarry first, which reduced their weight somewhat before transport. Then they were moved uphill, across uneven rocky terrain, to the summit of the hill. Then they were positioned with precision inside the circular enclosures, aligned in ways that appear deliberate and astronomically significant. All of this without wheels, without metal tools of any kind. Metal would not be widely used for another 8,000 years, without domesticated draft animals to pull heavy loads. The people who built this were, according to every piece of archaeological evidence from the site's earliest phases, hunter-gatherers. No domesticated grain has been found in the oldest layers, no permanent residences, no storage facilities for surplus food. The community that built these monuments was still moving with the seasons, hunting wild animals, gathering wild plants, for tens of thousands of years before agriculture changed everything. Hunter-gatherer groups do not produce surplus food. Without surplus, you cannot feed specialists craftsmen who spend their days carving stone instead of finding food. Without specialists, you cannot sustain the kind of skilled, sustained labor that produced these pillars. Without organization, you cannot coordinate hundreds of workers over multiple construction seasons spanning years or decades. What the scanner found for decades, researchers studied Göbekli Tepe the way archaeologists always have, with brushes, measuring tapes, cameras, and careful observation. They documented the visible. They mapped what they could reach. They built a detailed picture of the site's surface features and produced hundreds of academic papers analyzing what the human eye could see. But some things cannot be seen with human eyes. Some patterns are too large to perceive from ground level. Some details are too small to detect without instruments that measure in fractions of millimeters. Some relationships between structures only become visible when the entire site is rendered as data and analyzed by systems designed to find patterns across thousands of data points simultaneously. The new analysis combined 3 technologies: 3D laser scanning, AI-assisted pattern recognition, and high-resolution surface texture mapping. The laser scanning captured the geometry of the pillars and enclosures with millimeter-level accuracy, not approximate measurements, not estimates, but precise three-dimensional data for every surface, every angle, every carved line. The AI pattern recognition was then applied to this data, searching for regularities and relationships that human observers had missed across decades of manual study. What it found in the site's geometry was immediately striking. When researchers plotted the center points of three of the major enclosures and connected them, the resulting shape was a near-perfect equilateral triangle. The precision was not close, it was geometrically near-perfect, well within the margin that rules out coincidence or accident. Equilateral triangles do not form by chance.
Göbekli Tepe, so they form like equilateral triangles. I think there's been some studies done that shows that it was a very deliberate layout plan.
To create one, you must understand that all three sides must be equal in length. You must be able to measure distances accurately across open ground. You must be able to establish and maintain consistent angles. And you must plan the layout before you begin construction, because you cannot position the third structure correctly without knowing where the first two are going. This is geometry. Not intuitive geometry, not rough estimation, but deliberate geometric planning applied to monumental architecture. The ancient Greeks are traditionally credited with formalizing geometry as a mathematical discipline. Thales of Miletus is often cited as one of its earliest practitioners, working around 600 BCE. Euclid's foundational text on geometry was written around 300 BCE. These dates are considered milestones in the history of human intellectual achievement. Göbekli Tepe was built approximately 9,400 years before Thales. Its builders were applying geometric principles to large-scale construction nearly a full 10 millennia before those principles were formally written down. The scanning revealed additional layers of geometric organization throughout the site. Pillar positions within individual enclosures followed consistent spacing patterns that were not apparent from surface observation alone. The orientations of the T-shaped central figures appeared to align with specific positions of the sun, moon, and certain stars at particular times of year, suggesting an awareness of celestial cycles that goes far beyond casual observation of the sky. The proportions of the pillars' height, width, the dimensions of the carved caps showed ratios that appeared to follow a consistent template, as if every builder was working from the same set of standards, regardless of when or where on the site they were working. This was not improvised construction. This was not a group of people figuring things out as they went, making it up from one season to the next. The site was designed. It was engineered according to a coherent set of principles that governed measurement, proportion, spatial relationships, and astronomical alignment. Marks that don't make sense, the geometry finding was striking. The tool mark analysis was something else entirely. When stone is worked using other stone, which is the standard assumption for any construction predating metal tools, the marks left in the surface have specific, well-documented characteristics. Stone-on-stone percussion is inherently irregular. The impact points vary in depth, depending on the angle of the strike and the force applied. The edges of cuts are rough, sometimes crumbling. Grooves change in width and depth as the tool shifts slightly with each blow. The overall texture of a stoneworked surface carries the natural variation of hand labor. No two marks are exactly alike, because no two strikes of a handheld stone tool are ever exactly. This is what researchers expected to find on the Göbekli Tepe pillars. It is not what they found. The 3D surface scans revealed tool marks that did not fit the stone-on-stone model. In specific areas of the pillars, cuts ran perfectly straight over distances of 30, 40, 50 centimeters or more, without the deviation that handheld percussion inevitably introduces. Grooves maintained consistent depth and width from one end to the other, as if guided by something that held the cutting edge at a fixed angle and fixed pressure throughout the entire length of the cut. Certain edges were smooth in a way that stone striking stone simply does not produce, even with the most skilled napper working with the best available material. The spacing between repeated marks in some areas was regular to a degree that researchers described in peer-reviewed literature as showing a machine signature. That phrase caused immediate controversy when it was published. It still does. The implication is one that the archaeological community is deeply reluctant to accept, for good reason. If these marks were not made by stone tools, what made them? The builders had no metal. Bronze tools would not appear in this region for another 6,000 to 8,000 years.
carved with stone tools moved by hand.
Yeah, if we've got enough people and a vision, anything is possible. Remember, we're 4,500 years before the invention of metal tools.
Iron tools came thousands of years after that. There were no machines. There was no powered equipment of any kind that conventional understanding of prehistoric technology allows for. And yet the marks are there, documented, measured, consistent across multiple pillars, across multiple enclosures. Not imagined, not misinterpreted, physically present in the surface of the stone and captured in millimeter-accurate scan data. The surface texture analysis added a second layer of difficulty. In localized areas on several pillars, the limestone surface appeared to have been altered by exposure to high heat. The texture differed from naturally weathered stone, in ways consistent with thermal modification smoother, with a slightly glassy quality in spots, showing microscopic changes in the crystalline structure of the rock that occur when limestone is heated to temperatures above 700 to 800 degrees Celsius. This finding connected directly to evidence already identified at the quarry sites where the pillars were extracted. Researchers had previously documented signs of thermal shock fracturing at the quarries, a technique in which is applied to a rock surface over an extended period, heating it deeply and evenly, and then cold water is suddenly applied. The rapid temperature change causes the rock to fracture along the thermal gradient-producing cracks that are controlled by where the heat was applied rather than by the random fracture lines of percussion. The result is a cleaner, more precise separation than any hand tool can achieve. Large blocks can be separated from bedrock along essentially straight planes. Surfaces can be finished to a smoothness that percussion cannot replicate. This is not guesswork. This is applied thermodynamics. This is an understanding of how materials respond to extreme temperature differentials knowledge that requires observation, experimentation, and accumulated experience to develop and apply reliably at the scale Göbekli Tepe required. To state the obvious, this knowledge should not have existed 12,000 years ago. Not among people without permanent settlements. Not among groups that were supposed to be entirely focused on daily subsistence. Not in a period that predates every civilization in the conventional archaeological record, but the quarry sites show the thermal signatures. The pillar surfaces show the smooth zones.
Schmidt always hoped that it was funerary and that there would be burials underneath the walls or underneath some of the pillars or so on.
The scan data is unambiguous. Whatever tools and techniques the builders used, they were not what we expected. And the gap between what we expected and what the evidence shows is growing wider with every new analysis. History running in reverse. Every single finding discussed so far is challenging on its own. But the chronological pattern discovered in the scanning data is the one that changes the entire framework of the question. There is a basic assumption built into how we think about prehistoric technology and construction. It is so fundamental that most people never think to question it. The assumption is this: things get better over time. Early attempts are crude, later work is refined. Builders learn from experience, pass knowledge to their children, and each generation improves on what came before. Technology accumulates, skills sharpen. The arrow of human achievement points upward from simple to complex, from rough to precise, from less capable to more capable. This assumption is the backbone of how we date sites, how we read cultural development, how we reconstruct the history of any ancient civilization. It is so deeply embedded in archaeological methodology that questioning it feels almost absurd. Göbekli Tepe requires us to question it. When the scanning data was used to analyze the construction across different phases of the site, comparing the oldest enclosures at the deepest layers to the more recent construction, closer to the surface, the pattern was not what anyone expected. The oldest enclosures are the largest. They contain the heaviest pillars. The carvings on the oldest stones are the most detailed, the most sophisticated, the most technically demanding. Geometric precision in the oldest layouts is greater than in the later ones. By every measurable standard scale, craftsmanship, precision, complexity, the earliest construction at Göbekli Tepe is also the finest. Later construction is smaller. The pillars are lighter. The carvings are simpler. The layouts are less geometrically precise. The site, read chronologically from oldest to newest, shows consistent decline, not development. This is not a minor anomaly. This is a direct inversion of the pattern that should exist if a community was developing its skills over time. If the builders had been learning and improving, the newest work should be the best. The fact that the oldest work is the best means the builders did not develop these capabilities at Göbekli Tepe. They brought the capabilities with them. They arrived at this hilltop already knowing how to plan geometric layouts, already knowing how to carve in high relief with precision and confidence, already knowing how to quarry and transport 50-ton stones, already knowing apparently techniques for working stone that left marks we still cannot fully explain. They applied a tradition that was already mature, already refined, already at its peak. And as the generations passed and the original knowledge holders were gone, the tradition declined. The later builders were working with a fading inheritance, attempting to replicate what their predecessors had done without fully understanding how it had been done. Göbekli Tepe was not the origin of this tradition. It was possibly its last great expression, and whatever came before it, wherever that tradition developed, over however many centuries or millennia, is gone. It has left no other monuments we have identified, no cities, no texts, no tools, nothing except the fading echoes visible in the declining quality of construction at this one site in southeastern Turkey. Around 10,000 BCE, after centuries of use, the site was deliberately buried. This was not abandonment. The enclosures were not left to collapse and erode. They were filled intentionally, completely with massive quantities of material. Dirt, rubble, animal bones, stone tools, debris of every kind. The burial was thorough enough to cover the pillars entirely, sealing them beneath meters of protective fill. Moving that volume of material required an organized effort comparable to the original construction.
It would place the construction of Göbekli Tepe to a time when mainstream scholars suggest humans were roaming the earth as hunter-gatherers.
This was not casual disposal. This was preservation deliberate, systematic, designed to ensure the site would survive intact for as long as necessary. Why? Why spend centuries building something, then spend more generations burying it? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis offers one possible context. Around 12,800 years ago, during the period when Göbekli Tepe was active, the Earth experienced a sudden severe climate shock. Global temperatures dropped sharply. The gradual warming that had been ending the last ice age abruptly reversed, plunging the northern hemisphere back into near-glacial conditions for approximately 1,200 years. Evidence points toward a possible extraterrestrial impact event. As the trigger, a layer of nanodiamonds found at sites across 4 continents. Elevated concentrations of platinum and iridium in sediment layers dated to the onset of the Cold Period. Evidence of massive continent-wide wildfires, and the sudden extinction of large mammals that had survived all previous climate fluctuations of the Ice Age. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe may have already experienced catastrophe. They may have watched a civilization, their own, or one they knew of, collapse under conditions they could not control. They may have buried this site as an act of deliberate preservation, sealing their knowledge in stone against whatever disaster might come next. A message in a bottle, thrown not into the ocean, but into the earth itself, addressed to whoever came after, whenever that might be. We found it. 11,000 years later, we are still trying to read it. The pillars are still standing. After 12,000 years through ice ages, floods, the rise and fall of every empire, history remembers they are still standing. And now, for the first time, we have tools precise enough to actually read what they are saying. Geometry that predates formal mathematics by 9,000 years. Tool marks that match no known prehistoric technology. Construction quality that was highest at the oldest point and declined from there. A site deliberately buried by people who wanted it to survive. Every scan raises more questions than it answers. Every new layer of data pushes the origin of this knowledge further back into a past we cannot yet see. What else is out there? What other chapters of human history have we never read? If this made you rethink what you thought you knew, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the stones have been speaking for 12,000 years. It's about time more of us started listening.